Tara Brown and the Swinging London Colour Revolution by Vic Janum, Chapter 11, Part 1. My first opportunity to be Paul came almost immediately. If I could be him at the EMI New Year's Eve party? Sure, I said. Who's in on it? They turned out to be Jane Esher, and George and Patty Boyd, Harrison's highly fashion-conscious fiancée. When we got the chance to speak in private, she complimented me on my regular style, very hip and unique. One must always understand one's looks, or something to that effect, I said in my best Liverpoolian accent. The executives' wives quickly came swarming me, believing everything I told them. I wasn't going heavy fantasy, though, just regular answers, almost boring. It didn't matter, they loved it all. Some told me they were ready for me, which I found rather candid. Who says I'm ready for you, you old fart? I thought. Though I must admit there were two who were extremely charming. Money can do that. I'd almost forgotten about it. Jane, at some point, even had to grab my hand and whisper, "Now don't you get me all jealous, boyfriend." We stayed just long enough to pay our dues, and then it was off to greener pastures. Not wanting to confront our closest friends and have perhaps the wrong kind of rumors going around town, we ended up in some posh place where people kept looking at us, wondering who I was. A few of them I recognized from my father's circle, but I wasn't going to tell them I was Tara. Let them wonder whether I was Paul or not. It wasn't quite the night we had hoped for, so we soon set off to my place, where Nicky had been entertaining the real Paul, and we all got ready for music, tea, and smokes. George was joking about our likeness. "I've known Paul like forever, but I'm really confused here. Who's who?" "I'm Paul," I said. "And I'm Fall," said Paul. "You know, Faulty Paul." "That's funny," George said. "Fall, I like that." January saw a lull in the Beatles' adventures, so my interference wasn't needed anymore. Paul had recuperated, and the moustache he had grown was shaved off again. What was left of the scar on his lip was smoothed away whenever he had to go public. I was sad it had been only once that I stood in for him. It was fun, being someone else and playing with people's perceptions. I saw them again at the reception after George and Patty got married in a quiet family ceremony without John and Ringo, who were on holiday. The happy couple looked marvelous in their Mary Quant outfits. Patty knew how to dress George up, and he was stylish enough to enjoy letting her have her way with him. I remember George being ahead of the wave most of the time, especially in his choice of quite feminine clothes, which became all the rage later that year. I saw Brian again in the new year. The Stones had been spending over 2 months in the United States, touring and recording, and touring again and recording again. Just back from a short tropical holiday with Anita, he called at my place one evening. I offered acid and we shared some. "Are they doing acid over there as well?" I asked. "They do it all the time," laughed Brian. "They've been doing it for a long time." We freaked out and then we came round somewhat and Brian started talking. He talked about concerts and what Los Angeles was like, where they'd done the recording, if I understood him correctly. And then he talked about New York. LA is laid back and there's money going round, but New York is where the action is. It's a place where you can make a name for yourself without having a record deal. There's so many clubs and venues and endless bars that sometimes put a musician up. It's quite an exciting atmosphere. You should go there. "I've been to New York," I defended myself, "but it's been a while, that is true. When I was younger, we used to go there regularly." "You told me so that day we unexpectedly met." "Well, I wasn't lying." Well accommodated to our energies, Brian started getting informative, his voice lowering somewhat. I met these two guys in New York. We were looking for some acid, this reporter and me, and he knew these guys. They were dealing dope, but they were also musicians. What were their names? Lou and John. Lou Reed or something. They were having this band together, they said, and Andy Warhol was their manager. Had I heard of Andy Warhol? Oh, yes. We have got a print of his Coke bottle in the kitchen. They were very pleased with themselves, John and Lou, Brian said. They know they're going to make it, like we knew before it happened. Nobody's going to support us because we don't play by the book, Lou said. But we are the best band in the USA and probably in the world, and little by little people will find out. Nobody plays it straight like us. Nobody says it straight like us. We're rock and roll. That's what he said. He's good at talking straight, indeed. They're called the Velvet Underground. They played me a tape. Pretty cool. Quite dark, with uncomfortable tones and menacing voices, but always a good beat. You should check them out one day. We saw Brian and his girlfriend Anita a lot that winter. She and Nicky hit it off, like Brian and I had, and we engaged in crazy acid-laced adventures. Brian didn't always take it well, though. While the three of us were happily traversing the moodscapes in our minds, Brian would often freak out over something totally unimportant and could get really obnoxious then. But he kept taking acid, as if he needed to fight off his demons to reach our state of bliss. I'm not sure it helped him. He usually became quite unreasonable and aggressive, and while I often managed to keep him focused on some easy fun, for instance the Scalextric set I had bought and which offered the perfect relaxing entertainment for anyone whose mind is on a whirl, Anita had to endure his bouts of madness. Nicky noticed first. Do you think Brian is hitting Anita? She asked one morning after they had gone. I don't. Why do you ask? I think he is. There's unease about him. Not always, but sometimes. Have you asked her? No, not yet. I don't know if I can. Then why not let Anita come forward? If it's true and she's had enough of it, she will come through. If she reacts on time. Lots of women have waited too long. They were taught to tolerate and did so. Love, if you feel you should talk to her, then do so. But I'm not going to talk to Brian, eh? Not before we've heard from Anita personally that any of this might be true. I fear for her, Nicky said, and I fear for your friend Brian. He's very disturbed, dear. He can't handle his life. He's happy when he's playing music, but the rest of the time he's bad-tempered quite a lot. That's not good. He should seek help for that. He can afford it. I don't think he's ready for that, darling. His idea of support is sitting around with us. If he needs us to keep his hands off Anita, then why doesn't he buy a house for the four of us? Great idea. With the Stones out of town, recording in Los Angeles once more and on tour in Australia and Europe, and the Beatles also recording or on holiday, I turned my attention to work and other interests. As I had predicted, fashion was going mainstream and new shops were popping up all around. With Carnaby Street turning into a tourist attraction, the in crowd were concentrating on the neighborhoods where they themselves lived, Kensington and Chelsea, and then especially what we considered the main artery of modern life, King's Road. One of the first was Granny Takes a Trip, called this way because it started out selling a collection of vintage clothes from the 20s and 30s. I immediately fell in love with the place and spent a lot of time there, sharing a joint with the owners and talking crap. And I wasn't the only one. John and Paul, of Fab Four fame, discovered the place early on and in their wake followed all the happening people of the day. Also in Chelsea, a friend of mine, Michael, was opening a shop called Hung on You, after a Righteous Brothers song. He got his gear from everywhere and then started mixing and changing, creating lots of new styles. In a way, it went back to dandyism, to the early days of Lord Byron and Beau Brummell, when physical appearance was considered the main feature of city life. With the emphasis on looks came ostentation, the need to be seen, being loud and flashy and irritating the common people who clung to the hope this madness would soon end and we were all going safely back to the 1950s. That's what our life was all about. The Kings released a song about us, dedicated follower of fashion, clearly meant as a dig, but we loved it since we were generally as empty-headed as the song's protagonist, and proud of it, as it had become the leading argument in many people's lives. On Friday night, the 4th of March 1966, John Lennon lit up the universe with one of his trademark astute observations Western society was not ready for. It was my 21st birthday that day, and although I had put off the grand celebration I had in mind for practical reasons, I still hoped to gather some people around me that same evening and buy everybody drinks. While I managed to do so, few guests were particularly interested in me. They all walked around with a copy of the Evening Standard, containing an interview with Mr. John Lennon, in which he stated that the Beatles were now more popular than Jesus. If popularity meant the overall positive idea many people had of them, rather than absolute notoriety, then he might well be right, while the band should also score high on the name recognition list. Objectively, there was little wrong with his quirky remark. Nevertheless, Lennon must have known that people would freak out and condemn him for his foul words. How dare one speak of the Lord Jesus in any other way than with reverence? This used to be a strong emotion, the fear of the Lord, and if people had all but forgotten about it because they were doing well and didn't mind so much what John Lennon was saying, well, then the press were there to remind them of the place the Saviour rightfully occupied in many hearts. Confronted with a demand to choose, they chose obedience to the mechanism, as is the majority's want. People want to simply live their lives and be ruled in a reasonably just way. Unfortunately, after a positive post-war injection of top-down loyalty needed to restart the nation, this social contract was losing some of its shine in our hip days. Not that we noticed much of the strain, and has steadily faded ever since to reach the present state of mutual dislike, the one in which you read these lines and where none of your sorrows are to anybody's interest. We fuck you and you deal with it, and then we fuck you again, because you are never going to stop asking for more until you do. This is how I see our present state. Back in 1966, however, I hadn't traveled quite that far down the road to a sadomasochistic worldview. Like most of my peers, I had only fun watching the papers drool over the scandal they themselves had created. Next was the ridiculous meat and murdered baby dolls picture event. Still in March, the Beatles were in a photo shoot with some Australian photographer who hadn't been around very long and who got tasked with the cover photo of the band's special American Market album, Yesterday and Today. He draped them in enormous slabs of meat, a pound each easily, and then they each held up a decapitated doll, heads rolling around. They were dressed in butcher's coats and all had a distinctly dead look in their eyes. It was gross. It was not subtle. It was not funny. And it did not fit any of the Fab Force's sense of taste and fun. It was just awfully awkward, a ridiculous mistake nobody wanted to be reminded of. For a spectacular miss, and all acts suffered them at some point, the affair was remarkably soon forgotten by the press. To those that never forget, on the other hand, it marked the beginning of the end of swinging London. There had been rumors about shady Beatles photography before, all the way from With the Beatles to A Hard Day's Night and Help. that the shadows and hand moves were not accidental, and now this horror show confirmed our worst fears. Modern life was getting ugly, it seemed. Get ready for business, the word went. Get ready for making money for the man if you want to stay relevant beyond 25. I, to my luck, was young with money, a family and a job. I seemed like a rock-solid prospect. Seeing the sleeve of the Stones album Aftermath, which was released on the 15th of April, almost came as a relief. It was a monochrome print of a black and white group photo which sought to create light contrast. Yet at least the eyes were visible and nobody was doing anything crazy. Inside was a great album. All songs were credited to Mick and Keith, but Brian made it clear to me he and the others had equally contributed to the birth of many songs while they were jamming in the studio. Unequivocal was Brian's influence on the end product. His choice of exotic and folky instruments, such as the sitar and the dulcimer, gave many songs their identity. Brian was definitely happy with the result and wasn't fazed too much by their manager's insistence on promoting Keith and Mick as the heart of the band. "We know who we are," he said. "We know where we came from and what we're worth. Focusing on the Dartford duo is for purely commercial reasons." Nicky and I were not completely convinced Brian's observation was correct, but we wouldn't challenge him. It was good to see our friend in an upbeat mood. All in all, Aftermath was a fine piece of art. While some of the lyrics were clearly born out of Mick's personal obsessions and wrath, there was enough wisdom and insight in them to want to listen perceptively. Aftermath could be heard a lot in our moves that spring.